Hello, thank you for coming to the 4:30 session at Fluent on the last day. I realize we would probably all rather be in our rooms taking a nap, so I really appreciate you being here with me. This is Introducing NativeScript. That's the title of the presentation. In the schedule, you may notice that it actually says, Introducing NativeScript, all of your JavaScript are belong to us, which is the title that I originally submitted because it's super witty, and I thought it was great. And then I got this email from somebody that I work with, and they were like, hey, I saw that you're speaking at Fluent, but it looks like your grammar is all jacked up. So I changed the title because I didn't know. How many people know this? I can't even see you. I don't know why I'm asking. All right, so everybody knows them. OK, thank you. The problem was I tried a million different ways to tie this meme back into the talk, and I couldn't make it work. So I just decided to ditch it in the end. So this is Introducing NativeScript. What is NativeScript? NativeScript is a simple, clean and modern way to build native mobile applications using JavaScript. Now, when I was putting this presentation together, I stole this slide and many others from some presentations that other people have done, and TJ over here, and I had like this theme going, and I was like, I'm going to talk about how it's simple, clean, and modern, and it's just JavaScript and CSS, and then I'm going to like show this quote about XML, and then I'm going to show this other quote that's not about XML, but people are going to like it anyway. And then I'm going to talk about how there's like data binding, and there's common JS, and it's like standards-based CSS, and people are going to go crazy, and ECMAScript 6, and TypeScript, and this like visually appealing yet somewhat confusing diagram that's supposed to show you how the thing actually works, or the fact that you could use NPM to pull in libraries, or the fact that you have 100% access to native platform APIs, or what about how easy it is to install, or you can use it with any IDE. But at this point, I feel like I'm like, business, numbers. Is this working? Who gets this one? Anybody? Oh, good for you guys. This is Unikitty. Shame on you, those of you who don't know what this is, because it means you haven't seen the Lego movie, and I'm disappointed. But so for me, especially at this point in a conference, I'm like, stop with the slides. The slides will be online. You guys can go back and see all of that. You don't need me to talk to you about the conceptual principles of NativeScript. What you need is demos. So that's what we're going to do instead. Exactly. Now, any expert speaker will tell you that you should never live code, but I'm not an expert speaker, so that rule does not apply to me. So if this will either go very good or it will be very bad, either way, it will be entertaining for you. NativeScript.org, that's really the only thing that you need to know, and then you can go do a lot of this research on your own. It's also where you can get NativeScript. So that being said, let me grab my timer here and make sure. It only took me 3 minutes to get through that entire slide deck. You guys should be impressed. All right, now, let's hop over, and let's write some NativeScript. Let's get rid of the useless web, and let's bring up a terminal here. To install NativeScript, all you need to do is npm install g NativeScript. If you don't have your permission set up right, you'll be like sudo npm install g NativeScript, which personally, I like to sudo install stuff because it's like the only time in my life where I feel like I'm in control of something. And I'm like, do that. And it's like, no, because I said do it. And then it does it. And nothing else in my life works that way. So my permissions are jacked up on purpose just so I can do that every now and again. Now, I've already got NativeScript installed. So once you have NativeScript installed, you can create a new application. So TNS is the command that we use, Telerik NativeScript. And I'm going to create a new application. We'll just call it the Fluent demo. Yeah, that works. And then NativeScript will create a new project. So that just happened. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is change into that directory. And I'm going to add in a platform. So the next thing NativeScript wants to know is like, all right, sweet. So I can build iOS apps and Android apps. Which one do you want to build? We're going to build an iOS app today. You could build Android apps as well. You just need to add that platform in. So I'm going to go ahead and TNS platform add iOS. And it's going to go out. It's going to get all the template files, the Xcode project files. It's going to pull all this stuff in and dump it into my project directory so that I can build an iOS app. And that just happened while I was talking there. So now we're ready to build an iOS application. I'm going to go ahead and run this thing in the emulator. And actually, there's one thing I do want to talk about here before we get started. There's one question that I want to address because I know it's going to get asked. So let's go ahead and do this. NativeScript, and I stole this slide from TJ, NativeScript is not PhoneGap. Repeat after me. NativeScript is not PhoneGap. Very good. It's not PhoneGap because there's no HTML and there's no DOM. Repeat after me. There is no DOM. Very good. Let's have a quick quiz to see how well you actually get the concept that there is no DOM. If there's no HTML and there's no DOM, can you use the window object? No. Why not? Because there is no DOM. Can you select an element with jQuery? No. Why not? You guys are bright. What about this? Can you have an alert? Yes! Ha-ha! We tricked you. Because we proxy the alert and console to their native counterparts. So if you alert, you get a native dialog. If you console, it shells out to the actual output of the program. So I think everybody understands now that there is no DOM. So if there's no DOM, what is there? We're using JavaScript, CSS, and markup. And if it's not HTML and it's markup, what is it? Anybody? It's XML? It is XML. Now, it's one of my favorite quotes about XML. But here's the truth about XML. XML is terrible for data. It was never actually designed to be used for data, except in the case of the Atom publications. It was designed for documents. Terrible for data, great for user interface. It's just markup. So repeat after me. It's just markup. Just markup. Exactly. Now that we're all comfortable with that, let's go back here and pull up our emulator. And this is when we ran that TNS emulate, this is what NativeScript gives us by default, is this incredibly visually compelling native application showing off all the capabilities of the underlying native platform. You can tap on this, and like if you get all the way down to the bottom, it tells you that you've unlocked the tap achievement. It looks sweet. So awesome. Great use of my time. All right, let's go back, and what I want to do is I'm just going to open this bad boy up in Sublime. Let's move this over here. And look at the project structure. So inside this project structure, we have a couple folders. That platforms folder, that's where it's going to stick all the platform-specific files that it needs. You don't need to be in there. That's like your parents' room. Stay out of the platforms folder. Don't go in there. That's not for you. App folder is for you. That's where your code lives. Now, what's interesting here is in this app.js file, you'll see that it's this main module, main-page, and then you'll see these three files, mainpage.js, XML, and the view model. So what I want to do here is just blow all three of these things away. Let's just get rid of these. Perfect. And let's start from scratch. I'm just going to change this to main. And then I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to save it here. We're going to call it main.xml. It's going to be right in that app folder. Now, each NativeScript page is composed of a page tag. Looks like this. Let me expand this a little bit. Is the font size good for everybody? Can you see? Good? All right, cool. So you can see we have a page here, and then there's like a loaded event that's part of my snippet. We're not actually going to use that yet, but it's not going to hurt us to leave it in there. And then I'm going to put a label in here. And we'll give that label some text. Hello, world. And now I'm just going to emulate. Now, I've got a build script here in Sublime Text, so I don't have to keep jumping over to the terminal. But all I'm doing here is firing up the emulator, running that TNS emulate command, but actually from a build process in Sublime. And you'll see we actually get hello world. Excuse me. And this is an iPhone 6. Doesn't fit on this resolution, so there's a lot of scrolling here. And you can see it's sort of positioned, and I misspelled world. Now, what I want to do is show you how we can programmatically set the content of this control. And NativeScript does that with its own sort of binding framework. It's very easy to use. I'm going to show you how that works. So I'm going to create a new file. And I'm going to save this. And I'm just going to call it main model. And then I'm going to add in some, let's save it again and call it mainModel.js. Better. And then here we go. Now, NativeScript provides some abstractions or libraries for you out of the box, and one of those is something called an observable. And you can find all of these in this TNS modules folder. NativeScript uses CommonJS, so if you want to use a module, you require it. If you want to export some functionality from your JavaScript file, you export it. Require and export. It's very much like, if you've ever done any Node development before, just like that. So let's require this observable module here. There we go. And then what I want to do is create a model. So I've created a model. Now that I've created a model, anything I put on this model can be bound to, and we can listen for changes that happen on that model. So we're just going to add a model.message equals, better use single quotes or JSON's going to get mad at me, hello from the model. Super duper. And then let's just export it. Module.exports equals model. All right, now, how do we tell this main file to use that model? Well, it's simple. We wire it up in a corresponding code file for this main file. NativeScript uses a convention-based system where you have an XML file, and then you also have a JavaScript file. And if they're named the same thing and they're in the same directory, it just works. It's convention-based. So knowing that, let's create a new file and save it as main.js. And let me add in some code here. Now we're going to require this model, but we called ours main model right here. And then what I want to do is add in that page loaded event. So if you remember, we had that loaded event here in the XML. It's right there. That's this event right here. And you can see we're exporting it just like we would in CommonJS. And then what we're doing is we're saying, get us the page, and then set the binding context to the model. And the model is that thing that we pulled in right here. Now, if I've done everything correctly, we can now come over here to the XML file, and we can bind to that message like this. These are Polymer binding expressions. You'll find that everything in NativeScript is based on standards and something that you're familiar with and that is probably documented not only on our site, but somewhere else very extensively. I said URL. Getting ahead of myself. Let's do message. We'll build this here. Keep in mind, this is beta, and they actually released a version today, which completely broke my demo. So TJ was helping me earlier try to figure out what I had actually done wrong. And it looks like I did something wrong here. Yeah, let's see here. I think when you require main model, it actually looks in the TNS modules folder, and instead it's looking for this. So what I'm going to do here is just move this over. And you'll notice that the great thing about NativeScript is that you can require something from any location. So I've got this main model file here. Let's move this. Go ahead and delete this file. And let's just move this. Move. And we'll move it to the models directory. There we go. So now it's in a models directory. So you can structure your code however you want. And then up here, we're just going to go models, main model. Uh-oh. I just closed out my, there we go. Let me make sure we got that right here. Main XML, main model. All right, looks good to me. Let's build that. So now we're getting hello from the model, right? So we've actually been able to pass data from our JavaScript to our UI. Now, knowing that, let's go ahead and build something a little more complicated. And I was thinking, what better thing to build, or what riskier thing to build than sort of a Reddit reader? So what I want to do is show you a demo where we go get some remote data. We put that remote data in a list view. We implement endless scrolling in the list view. And we also want to implement a web view as well, so we can open a URL. But we'll see how far we can get through all of those things in the 30 minutes that we have here. Actually, we're already 15 minutes in, so I should probably hurry up here. All right, so let's go back to the main file. Let's take out this label here, and instead, let's put in a list view. In this list view, you can see that we have this items. Items is going to be a collection, and I've called it Reddit. And then inside, we have a template. So for each item in this Reddit collection, we're going to go through, and we're going to have a label. It's going to be bound to the title. We're going to wrap the text, and then I've got a CSS class that we haven't defined yet. We'll do that in just a second. So now that we've done that, we need to make this Reddit object here. So what I'm going to do back in the model is get this observable array module here, pull this in, and then we can come down and add in a new observable array that we've called Reddit. So now anything that we add to this observable array, and by the way, these are native array methods, so there's no goofy syntax here. Anything that we add into this model will now be able to be iterated through in the XML file. So back in the main page, what we want to do is make an HTTP call. So we'll need the HTTP module, so we'll require that in. And then we just need to make a get. Looks like this. So we have a URL. That's the Reddit URL to the Reddit API. This after variable here, this is for paging. We'll use this here in a second. And then this HTTP module, and then just get JSON, this URL, and then it's NativeScript built on modern principles, so it's just promises. Get this URL, then with the response, do this thing. And you can see that I'm iterating over it with a native for each loop on the array. And then on the model, I'm pushing with the native push method on that array into a new object with a title and a URL. Those are both things that we bound to in the markup. Now, having done this, that should be all that we need to do to be able to actually run this app, have a list view, and have data coming back from the remote service and put into our list view. So let's see if that actually works. So there we go. That fast. Now, you'll notice this doesn't really look that good. And also, there's some questionable content here, but it's Reddit. Sorry. Actually, we were talking to somebody. Somebody was like, you should use GitHub because it's safer. And I was like, yeah, but Reddit's so much more fun. So let's make this look a little bit better. NativeScript supports CSS. Not all of CSS, but sort of a subset, but the properties that you will recognize. So we're going to make these items a little taller. So let's just go ahead and add that in. There we go. And once we do that, our list view will look a little bit nicer. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to tap on each one of these items and have it go to like an embedded browser where we can actually see what that item is. So in order to do that, we need to add a new view. So let's do that. Actually, do this right here, and we'll save this as browser.xml. And then we will... Did that go in the right place? Yeah, it did. And then let's TNS page. We've got a new page here. And we're going to use the navigated to method here instead of the page load method. All of this is documented in the API. And then we're going to put a web view here. So TNS web view. All these abstractions are provided for you by NativeScript. And if we were to go back and look in the TNS modules folder and you went into UI, which is where all this stuff is coming from, you'll see there's that web view right there, which is a wrapper around the web view in iOS and in Android so that it's cross-platform. Now, this URL, we want to bind this to URL. Now, where is that URL going to come from? It's going to come from whichever item we tapped on. Now, the items that we have are structured so that they look like this. There's a title and a URL. So how do we get that object over to that browser page? Well, the first thing that we need to do is handle the item tap event. So right here on the list view, I'm just going to say on item tap, let's execute this item tap event, which we don't have yet. So I'm going to come down, item tap, right here. I'm going to come back to this function in a second. Before we can implement navigation, we need to pull in this frames module. NativeScript has this concept of frames, and it's how it deals with navigation inside the application so that you don't have to worry about it. So once you have the frame module, we're basically saying here, let's get the model item that we want to display from the Reddit collection based on its index, easy enough. And then we're just going to call this frame module topmost navigate. And we're going to navigate to this browser file that we created, browser.xml. And then we're going to pass the item as the context that it should use for binding. There's one thing that we need to do, though, before we can make this actually work, and that is we need to add a browser.js file. So let's do that. Because if you remember, we have to set the binding context. And then there we go. So here on the navigated to method, if you remember, we had a navigated to method. We're exporting it here. And I'm doing the export a little differently just to show you that it doesn't have to be export.every function, right? You can name all your functions and export them out in a block at the bottom. It's just JavaScript. It's just CommonJS. This should make you feel very comfortable if you've done something like this before. It is nothing squirrely outside of those bounds. So now that we've done this, if I've done everything correctly, what are the chances of that? We should be able to tap on one of these items and actually see the URL. I'm interested in seeing this penguin with terrible self-esteem. I don't know about you guys. So go ahead and load this up again. You can see the reloads really fast inside the emulator. So let's go ahead and click on this. And we get a web view. And you'll also notice, because we're using a native application, we get a navigation bar at the top, and we get a back button for free. We didn't have to do any of that. And because we're completely native, we're not inside a web view, what do we get? We get this too, right? Come on. Like, this is amazing stuff. But we can do better than this. I want to tackle something that's hard in mobile applications, infinite scrolling. This is not something that's easy to do, but I want to do it right now in the, 5 minutes that I have left here. So let's go into the XML file. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to add an event here that says load more items, OK? And we'll create a load more items event. So the list view, our abstraction of the list view, fires load more items when you get to the bottom of the list. It fires that event. And then all we need to do is do what? Load more items. That's right. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to create a function here called load items. And then close it off. And then I got to fix my indentation or else I won't be able to sleep at night. So let me do that. Anybody else? Right? All right. So we've got this load items function. So now we need to call that on page load. So let's go ahead and do that, load items. And then the next thing we need to do is actually handle this load more items method. So there we go. And we're just going to call that load items function. Now that we've done that, let's build it. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and scroll down to the bottom of the emulator here. I'm going to scroll, 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 scroll. I get to the bottom and more items. So if I do this, it'll just keep on scrolling through this list of items, and I didn't have to write any code other than what you just saw to make this happen. This is really hard to do on the web if you've ever tried to do this before, but on native it just works the way that God intended for it to work. Because you should be able to do these kinds of things without pulling your hair out, which is why I look the way that I look after all this time. There's another thing that I want to show you here, and that is that sometimes you need access to things that NativeScript does not provide for you, and in that case, you can drop down and hit the native APIs. Now, in order to simulate this, I'm going to go into one of these files here, and I'm going to turn off some of this functionality that we're abstracting away here and show you what this looks like. Wasn't the frame? Did I pass it? Right here, right? Yeah. All right, so I'm going to turn this off. This is controlling the nav bar. And what I want to do is I'm going to manually control the nav bar from iOS. So over here in this main.js file, what I'm going to do here is get a reference to, watch this. This is going to blow your mind, page.ios.navigation controller. Now, what I just did there was asked, give me a reference to the UI navigation controller that iOS is using. I kid you not, in JavaScript, I just got it. I have it. So now that I have it, I can call any method, any property, any function. I can do anything that iOS can do to that nav bar, I can now do to that nav bar. For instance, I can show it, because by default, it's not showing on this first page, right? It only shows on the second page, doesn't show on the first page. So now I got the nav bar showing. What else can I do? I can change the title in the nav bar. We'll just call this top for top stories so that I can actually change the title that shows up in the nav bar. And one of the things that you'll notice is when the title changes, what else changed? The back button text. The other thing that I can do is I can actually change the colors. This doesn't look very Reddit-y to me. I want to change the colors. If we go to, let's go to Reddit here. And I use this fantastic little program called SIP. I don't know if anybody else uses this. It's a color picker. Let's see if I can, there it is right there. And we'll just pick the color. And it actually gives it to me in color format that I need, because I'm about to tell iOS I want a native color object from you. And it's going to give it to me because I now own iOS via JavaScript, and I don't have to write any Objective-C. And that's what makes NativeScript awesome. So let me do that. We'll set the color. So what I did here, I'm going to expand this so we can actually see this, is I said, controller, now give me the navigation bar. Now I'm going to set the bar tint color. Now I want a UI color, which is a class, an Objective-C class, and then I call this color with red, green, blue, alpha. If you go to the Objective-C documentation for this bar tint color, you will find this method, and inside of there, I'm going to pass those values in. I am interacting directly with native APIs at this point. This is very important because in any framework that you're in, it's only a matter of time before there's something that it doesn't do that you need to do yourself. And if you can't do this, you're going to be up a creek. Either that or you're going to be dropping into Xcode to write Objective-C, and if you wanted to write Objective-C to begin with, you wouldn't be doing this. All right, so now that we've done that, let's run this again. And now we've got this nice blue nav bar, and if I click on the penguin with terrible self-esteem here, it actually carries through to the ones below, right? So it's application-wide, this nice blue Reddit color. Let's go back to our great quote about XML here. So we've got about 5 minutes left, and I will take some questions from you. I know we've talked to a lot of you at the booth already. If you go to nativescript.org, you can find all of this stuff. Really, the only thing you need to remember in your head is npm install NativeScript. And that will get you all of this stuff. Here you'll find our GitHub repo. You'll find the API reference. You'll find getting started docs. You'll find that visually appealing yet somewhat confusing diagram that you can read through on your own about how NativeScript actually works. The brilliant thing about NativeScript is that it doesn't cross-compile. There's no cross-compiling happening. The way that NativeScript works is that it packages a JavaScript virtual machine, and then what it does is it takes and it injects, because those machines are open, methods in so that the virtual machine then knows when I ask for UI color that I'm asking for something that's native, and then the virtual machine executes directly against the Objective-C, C++ code in that callback. I know that's a little bit confusing, but it's actually really, really simple. And what that allows us to do is it allows it to be extremely fast, right? Because the JavaScript is not running in some sort of abstraction. It's really running directly on the Rails. And I don't mean Ruby on Rails. I mean, like Rails where something goes really fast. And it also allows us to provide zero-day support for new APIs. So when a new API comes out, we don't have to launch a new or deploy an entire new SDK for you to be able to take advantage of those new features. We just provide metadata, essentially descriptions, so that the virtual machines know how to handle that. With that being said, I think we've got 2 more minutes here. So if anybody wants to ask any questions or has any comments. Right, so the question was, who's supporting NativeScript? We said it was open source. Who's backing it right now? NativeScript is developed by Telerik. Telerik is a subsidiary of a company called Progress Software, which is a very large enterprise software company. It's been around for about 30 years. NativeScript is backed by a team of engineers that work just on the NativeScript project. They do take pull requests. It is open source. Telerik, kind of the first place my mind would go is like, what's the catch? Why are you doing this open source if you're paying people to work on it? And the reason is because when you make something that's really good, you want everybody to use it. And when you're working with developers, the best way to get your tools in the hands of developers is to make them open source. And so that's what we've done. And the reason why we did that is because Telerik monetizes around tooling that goes on top of NativeScript. So if you're a Visual Studio developer, you can buy software that plugs into Visual Studio that then helps you go with NativeScript. Most of the tools that we're building at Telerik are built on top of NativeScript going forward. So this is a project, I think that's always the concern, right? Like, how long is this thing going to be around? Is it viable? We hope so, because we're building most of the company on NativeScript, so it's going to be around for a long time, at least as long as Telerik is. That was a great question. Any others? Here. Where? Right there? Oh, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
So JavaScript numbers are not compatible with some of the numbers in Swift or Objective-C. How do you solve that? Big ends in Objective-C can be represented in JavaScript.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, JavaScript's numbers are not compatible with some of the primitives in Objective-C. How do we solve that? I have no idea. There is an answer to that question. I don't know what it is. TJ may know. I don't know if he knows. Do you know, TJ?
If you go onto the NativeScript docs, each of the runtimes for iOS and Android, we publish basically the algorithms of how we transfer between the various different types. It's not just numbers, right? This applies to strings and a bunch of other types as well. So if you go to docs.nativescript.org, at the bottom, you'll see a runtime section. There's docs for Android and iOS, so we spell that out in a lot more detail than we can go into today.
So basically, he just said, read the docs. He said RTFM.
I said it a little nicer.
You did. It was a very nice RTFM. All right, we're 1 minute over. Thank you so much for coming to learn about NativeScript. I appreciate it.